Hello everybody, and we move on more than 100 years now until the mid to late 1st century AD. By the 60s AD, Judea had been under Roman control as part of the Roman Empire for over a century. In common with other Roman provinces, the army was a permanent presence, the administration was there, Roman coinage was there, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, as it says in the New Testament, and there was taxation. The two issues that caused most problem were taxation and religion. On the whole, the Romans were tolerant of other religions. They weren't terribly interested in what other people wanted to worship, provided that they did some basic Roman things, acknowledged Roman sacrifices, and in particular by this time acknowledged the emperor and were prepared to make offerings to the emperor. So, taxation first of all. The Romans caused an awful lot of problems in their provinces by their attitude to money. As Cicero said in the 1st century BC, words cannot describe how bitterly we are hated among foreign nations owing to the wanton and outrageous conduct of the men whom we have sent to govern. Could possibly be imperialists everywhere. Maybe India under the British Raj might have had something to say about that. Sometimes, therefore, Romans caused rebellions by their financial rapaciousness. Sometimes there were freedom fighters or terrorists who gathered enough momentum themselves to fight occupation. This happened around the Roman Empire. There had recently been a rebellion in Britain led by Boudicca, which had come quite close to kicking the Romans out of this province. So the Romans were quite sensitive about the whole issue of people rising up against them. There were two key issues then, money and religion. And the religious aspect was emperor worship. Now, the issue of worshipping the emperor and how this related to the Jews had raised its ugly head, particularly under the Emperor Caligula between 37 and 41 AD. Caligula thought it would be a good idea to place a statue of himself to be worshipped in the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem, and this was about to cause a major revolt, as you might expect. And the situation was only saved by the murder of Caligula. He was succeeded by Claudius, who was somewhat less interested in that as a means of imperial oppression, and so he rather left well alone. Claudius was succeeded by Nero, and Nero spent extravagantly right throughout his reign, and so he caused a financial crisis. So this comes back to not a religious problem, but a financial problem. Taxes were raised massively throughout the empire and huge amounts of money were demanded from the provinces. This had caused some problems in Britain. We hear hints of this from Tacitus. And it certainly caused problems in Judea. We know quite a lot about this from Josephus, a Greek-speaking Jewish historian who later became a Roman citizen. So he's got a good angle on this from most sides. Because Judea was a kingdom, it meant that it had been saved from having lots of legionary soldiers stationed in it. It had only auxiliary troops, and not that many of them. This had an important effect that when the troops were summoned to take a huge amount of gold from the temple treasury, it was relatively easy for the Jews to resist, and the auxiliary troops were defeated and driven back. This then gave a bit of traction to the rebels, and there were more rebellions against Roman rule in against local fortresses right throughout the province. It was clearly a massive problem because the whole province was on the point of rebelling, as indeed Britain had under Boudicca. So what did the Romans do? They sent for the legions. They sent for a lot of legions. At one time, during the Jewish Revolt, it's estimated that almost a quarter of all the legionary soldiers in the Roman Empire were stationed in Judea. So massive a problem had the revolt become. They were sent there, the legions were summoned under the leadership of Vespasian and also his son Titus, a hard-bitten general who was later to become emperor, and his son Titus, who was to succeed him at the end of the 70s AD. We know quite a lot about this from Josephus, and initially, after the Jewish successors, the Romans gradually started to reassert control right throughout the rest of Judea. So it then came down to Jerusalem. Jerusalem had massive walls, and it was very, very difficult to take by storming it. So it was resolved that there should be a siege. And this siege had some terrible effects. The siege went on for many months and extended then into years. And this is how Josephus described part of the situation in Jerusalem. The Jews, unable to leave the city, were deprived of all hope of survival. The famine became more intense and devoured whole houses and families. The roofs were covered with women and babies too weak to stand. The streets full of old men already dead. Young men and boys, swollen with hunger, haunted the squares like ghosts and fell wherever faintness overcame them. To bury their kinsfolk was beyond the strength of the sick, and those who were fit shirked the task because of the number of the dead and the uncertainty about their own fate. For many, while burying others, fell dead themselves, and many set out for their graves before their hour struck. In their misery no weeping or lamentation was heard. Hunger stifled emotion. With dry eyes and grinning mouths, those who were slow to die watched those whose end came sooner. Deep silence enfolded the city, and a darkness burdened with death. So terrible scenes in Jerusalem, and this extended up to the year 70, so the whole revolt had been lasting for 4 years. Eventually, the siege was successful and Jerusalem was taken, and then there was the battle for the temple. This didn't last nearly as long, and the Romans broke in. Maybe the temple was destroyed accidentally by rampaging soldiers. Maybe it was part of the policy to destroy it once and for all. Either way, the temple was destroyed. Many thousands, tens of thousands of Jews were enslaved. Many more were killed. It was an utterly devastating outcome to the siege and to the rebellion. The treasures from the temple were taken, and we have evidence for that from the Arch of Titus, which was built almost 10 years later in Rome. Vespasian became emperor after the chaos of the year of 4 emperors. This must have seemed like the end of things for the Jews, but it wasn't. Some of the Jews had taken refuge on the rocky fortress of Masada, previously fortified by Herod the Great, and there were more terrible times to come. The Jews, however, endured, bearing the yoke of slavery under Rome.